I transmigrated into a husband. The Alpha King planned to divorce, so I happily packed my bags. Your Majesty, should I leave the wedding ring on the table, or would you prefer a receipt for that too? The words left my mouth before I could stop them, and the entire royal bedroom went silent. King Adrian Blackwood stood 6 feet away, dressed in a black military coat with silver buttons, his expression carved from winter. Beside him, the royal attorney held a thick folder against his chest as if it were a shield. On the table between us lay the document that was supposed to destroy me. A petition for divorce. Before I tell you how I escaped that ending, subscribe for more dramatic stories and tell me where you are watching from. As an Omega royal consort, the law expected me to remain under the crown's protection until the divorce became final, a polite phrase that often meant control. 3 minutes earlier, I had opened my eyes beneath a silk canopy and realized I was no longer an exhausted Chicago office worker. I was Ethan Hale, unwanted Omega husband of the Alpha King and minor villain in a novel I had finished the night before. Same name. Much worse life. In the original story, this Ethan refused the divorce, caused a public scandal, and spent the next several chapters begging Adrian to love him. After his fall, Chancellor Julian Voss planned to place his obedient nephew Lucas beside the throne. It ended badly. I had no intention of following the script. Adrian's steel blue eyes narrowed. You understand what this document means? Perfectly. I picked up the pen. It means separate residences, no claim to the crown, and freedom from attending 6-hour banquets where everyone pretends the soup is warm. The attorney made a small choking sound. Adrian did not laugh. He watched as I read every page, corrected an error in the property list, and signed my name with a flourish. The moment the ink dried, something inside me loosened. In the book, this room was a cage. To me, it was a hotel I was checking out of. I'll be gone by noon, I said. Adrian's calm expression shifted by half an inch. There is no need for theatrics. I agree. I crossed to the wardrobe and pulled out the first suitcase I found. That's why I'm packing quietly. 10 minutes later, 3 opened bags covered the bed. I took only plain shirts, 2 pairs of boots, a weathered notebook, and the blue wool coat listed as my personal property. Every crown jewel and ceremonial gift remained exactly where it was. Adrian stood near the fireplace, still watching me as though I had transformed into a stranger before his eyes. Maybe I had. The emerald necklace was given to you on our anniversary, he said. I glanced at the velvet box. You didn't attend that anniversary. His jaw tightened. It is still yours. No, it belongs to the palace. I closed the lid and placed it beside the wedding ring. I don't want anything that can be used later to call me greedy. For the first time, uncertainty crossed his face. The old Ethan would have cried. He would have asked what he had done wrong. I already knew. He had married a man who never trusted him. That was mistake enough. A servant entered and announced that the carriage could be ready within the hour. Make it 30 minutes, I said cheerfully. I travel light. Adrian finally stepped forward. You planned this. I looked at the unsigned half of the divorce agreement in his hand. No, Your Majesty. You planned it. I'm simply cooperating. Then I fastened the last suitcase and smiled, because somewhere beyond those palace gates waited a life the original Ethan had never been allowed to choose. A servant later told me that Adrian remained beside the table after I turned away, staring at the ring while his hand hovered over the unsigned agreement. The palace gates closed behind me with a sound that felt less like an ending and more like a lock finally opening. I sat alone inside the royal carriage, watching the white stone towers disappear through the rear window while 3 suitcases rested at my feet. The original Ethan had spent for years inside those walls, waiting for Adrian to look at him with something other than suspicion. I had spent less than an hour there and already knew I would rather sleep in a barn than return as a decorative husband. My destination was Grey Haven, a neglected country estate listed among my personal holdings. According to the divorce papers, it sat nearly 90 miles north of the capital and had not produced income in years. That sounded perfect. No court dinners, no whispered insults, and no Alpha King studying me as if happiness were evidence of a crime. The road grew rough after sunset. The oldest suitcase felt oddly familiar beneath my hand, as if the original Ethan had used it often, and it slid from the seat when the carriage struck a deep rut. It landed with a heavy thud, but the sound was wrong. There was a dull rattle beneath the leather lining, as though something had been hidden inside the frame. I asked the driver to stop at the next roadside inn, carried the suitcase into my room, and locked the door. The lining had been stitched by hand, with one corner slightly uneven. I borrowed a small sewing knife from the innkeeper and carefully opened the seam. A narrow black notebook slipped into my palm. The first pages contained columns of numbers, delivery dates, warehouse locations, and payments connected to the Royal Winter Relief Fund. I had worked in corporate accounting back in Chicago. Numbers had patterns, and dishonest numbers had even clearer ones. The record showed purchases of food, medicine, and heating supplies for northern villages, but delivery confirmations repeated the same signatures. Several warehouse totals matched down to the last copper coin across towns more than 50 miles apart. That was not laziness. It was fraud. Tucked into the back cover was a folded letter written in the original Ethan's careful handwriting. Your Majesty, it began, I know you have been told that I interfere in matters beyond my position, but people will suffer if these accounts are ignored. The northern warehouses are empty. Someone is using my seal to authorize false transfers. Please believe me once, even if you never believe anything else I say. The letter had never been sent. A faint brown stain marked one corner, and I could not tell whether it came from rain or tears. For the first time, I stopped thinking of the original Ethan as a foolish character. He had known something was wrong, tried to warn Adrian, and been deliberately silenced. I turned to the final page and found a list of 7 names. 6 belonged to shipping companies and treasury clerks I did not recognize. The 7th did. Chancellor Julian Voss, Adrian's closest advisor, the man who had recommended the divorce and supplied every accusation against me in the original story. Beneath his name, Ethan had written one final sentence in hurried, uneven ink. Do not trust the man who speaks for the king before the king has chosen to speak for himself. Greyhaven did not look like freedom when I first saw it. It looked like a place the kingdom had forgotten on purpose. The estate sat beneath a grey morning sky at the end of a muddy road, its stone walls stained by years of rain and its iron gate hanging crooked from one hinge. Half the windows had been boarded shut. The garden had become a field of weeds, and the roof sagged above the eastern wing as if the house itself were tired of standing. The carriage driver glanced at me with open concern. I thanked him, carried my 3 suitcases inside, and told myself that ruined walls were still better than a beautiful cage. Then I heard a child coughing somewhere behind the main house. I followed the sound past an empty kitchen and through a yard covered with dead leaves. The old carriage barn had been turned into a shelter. Nearly 30 people were crowded inside beneath patched blankets. Most were omegas, elderly beaters, and children wearing coats too thin for the northern cold. A young man stepped between me and the others. He could not have been older than 17. He had pale blonde hair, tired brown eyes, and the careful posture of someone accustomed to apologizing for taking up space. His name was Noah Bennett. He had grown up near Greyhaven with his younger sister, then worked in the palace supply laundry, where relief blankets were counted before shipment. He had been dismissed after asking why wagons listed as full left the capital nearly empty. He assumed I had come to remove them from the property. When I told him Greyhaven belonged to me and no one was being thrown out, the disbelief on his face hurt more than suspicion would have. The manager had left months earlier. The pantry held 6 jars of preserves, 1 sack of flour, and perhaps 3 days of dried beans. According to the official records, Greyhaven had received 12 wagonloads of winter supplies. According to reality, it had received nothing. I opened the black notebook that evening and compared the listed deliveries with Noah's memory. The dates matched days when empty wagons had passed through town without stopping. The original Ethan had been right. Someone had stolen from people who had no power to complain, then used his seal to hide it. I could not fix the kingdom overnight, but I could keep Greyhaven warm. The only valuable thing I had brought was a silver watch from my former life in the palace, legally listed as my personal property. Its royal maker's mark made it worth far more than the silver alone, and I sold it in the nearest town the next morning. By sunset, 2 wagons returned with flour, potatoes, blankets, lamp oil, medicine, and enough firewood to last several weeks. I inventoried the kitchen, assigned work by ability rather than rank, and turned the west parlor into a heated room for the youngest children. Noah proved remarkably good with numbers, so I taught him how to record every incoming item and every meal served. Within 4 days, smoke rose steadily from Greyhaven's chimneys. Within a week, laughter returned to the halls. A little girl named Clara drew a crooked crown on a scrap of paper and placed it on my head during supper. For one ridiculous minute, I sat at the end of a scarred wooden table while 30 people called me King Ethan and passed around bowls of stew. I laughed so hard my eyes watered. That night, I stood outside beneath a sky filled with stars and realized I had not thought about Adrian once all day. Then Noah came running from the gate, breathless and pale. Royal riders had been spotted less than a mile away. At their front rode the Alpha King himself, carrying an arrest order bearing my name. "Before you arrest me, Your Majesty, please ask your soldiers to lower their voices. The children have only just learned that doors do not always open to bad news." Adrian stopped beneath Greyhaven's crooked gate, one gloved hand resting near the sealed order tucked inside his coat. Behind him stood 12 royal riders, their dark uniforms sharp against the snow-dusted road. I had expected anger when he arrived. What I had not expected was the brief uncertainty in his eyes when he looked past me and saw Noah holding Clara's hand on the front steps. "You were reported for taking royal funds," Adrian said. His voice was calm, but every person in the yard heard it. 3,000 gold crowns were transferred under your authority 2 days after you left the palace. Then someone has remarkable confidence in my ability to commit financial crimes while buying potatoes. I stepped aside. "You are welcome to inspect everything." Adrian studied me as though he suspected another performance, but he entered without ordering anyone to restrain me. I led him past blankets drying near the fireplace and into the dining room we used as an office. Noah placed our account books on the table with trembling hands. Every purchase was recorded beside a receipt. The money had come from the sale of my silver watch, and the town jeweller's signed statement was attached to the first page. "We have spent less than 180 crowns, I explained. Mostly on food, medicine, lamp oil, and repairs. If I stole 3,000, I have shown very little imagination." Adrian ignored the joke and reviewed the entries line by line. His expression changed when he reached the inventory from the official winter relief records. 12 wagons were delivered here, he said. "No," Noah answered before fear could silence him. His voice shook, but he remained standing. 12 empty wagons passed the North Road. None entered Greyhaven. One of Adrian's officers looked toward the barn, perhaps expecting hidden crates. I gave them every key. They searched every pantry, cellar, bedroom, and shed. They found dated flour, counted medicine, measured firewood, and no royal supplies, because none had arrived. Adrian followed me into the west parlor, where 6 children were reading beside the fire. Clara looked up from her book and waved. "King Ethan," she called. The room went painfully quiet. "It is an honorary title," I told Adrian. "The crown is paper and the duties involve tasting soup." Clara hurried over and placed the crooked paper crown in my hands. Adrian stared at it, then at my patched sleeve. I could see him comparing Greyhaven with Julian's portrait of me, greedy, wasteful, manipulative. Nothing here supported it. Miles Carter, the royal archivist who had accompanied Adrian, entered carrying a leather document case. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "there is another issue." He removed 3 sealed envelopes and placed them on the table. Each bore Adrian's name in the original Ethan's careful handwriting, but none had been opened. "Before we left the capital, His Majesty ordered me to inspect the transfer records used to justify your arrest," Miles continued. These were hidden in a restricted cabinet inside the chancellor's office. All 3 were addressed directly to the king, but none were delivered. Adrian touched the nearest envelope but did not open it immediately. When were they written? The first was sent 8 months ago. The fire cracked softly behind us. Adrian looked at me, and for the first time since I had met him, there was no suspicion in his face. There was only the dawning realization that the truth had been waiting within his own palace while he chose to believe someone else. "You tried to warn me," he said. I glanced at the unopened letters. He did. Adrian's gaze sharpened at my choice of words, but before he could question it, Miles turned over the final envelope. Across the back, in a different hand, someone had written a single instruction. Deliver nothing from Ethan Hale to the king without Chancellor Voss's approval. Adrian opened the first letter with the care of a man handling evidence against himself. His eyes moved slowly across the page, and with every line, the silence in Greyhaven's dining room grew heavier. I watched his expression tighten when he reached the paragraph describing empty warehouses and falsified delivery schedules. He opened the second letter, then the third. None contained accusations born from jealousy. None begged him to return to our marriage. They were organized, precise, and painfully respectful, as if the original Ethan had believed perfect manners might succeed where desperation had failed. "Why did you stop trying?" Adrian asked at last. I looked toward the window, where snow had begun falling in thick white sheets. Perhaps he realized that being ignored hurts less when you stop expecting someone to listen. Adrian lowered the letter. The words struck harder than I intended, but I did not apologize. That afternoon, the storm worsened until the road disappeared beneath nearly a foot of snow. Adrian's riders secured the horses in the old stable, and Greyhaven suddenly had 12 additional guests to feed. Instead of demanding special treatment, Adrian carried firewood inside. Clara corrected his terrible stacking twice, and Noah rebuilt the pile after he left. By evening, we sat across from each other at the scarred dining table while everyone else slept. Between us lay the letters, the black notebook, and a map of the northern supply routes. "Return to the palace with me," Adrian said. No, he blinked, clearly unaccustomed to hearing that answer delivered without fear. "Greyhaven is not secure." "Then make it secure. You are still legally my husband until the petition is finalized. That is not the protection you think it is." Adrian's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. I placed one finger on the map. "I will help investigate the missing relief funds. I know how to trace false accounts, and Ethan left enough information to begin. But I return only as an independent advisor. I will choose my own room, control my own schedule, and leave whenever I decide. Greyhaven remains protected, and no one here is displaced. You are giving orders to your king. I am stating the price of my cooperation." For several seconds, only the wind answered. Then Adrian nodded. "Agreed." It should have felt like a victory. Instead, beneath the firelight he looked like a tired man discovering that those closest to him had built walls around the truth. The following morning, Miles returned from the village archive with a bundle of old correspondence. He had found copies of additional letters Ethan had sent through unofficial channels. Adrian read each one. He learned that Ethan had requested medicine for northern clinics, questioned warehouse totals, and asked for an investigation months before the shortages became public. He also learned Ethan remembered his coffee without cinnamon, knew which meetings triggered his headaches, and had arranged his mother's favorite song on the anniversary of her death, then listened from another room because Adrian never invited him to stay. "I remember the music," Adrian said softly. "I thought Julian arranged it." I closed the file. "You thought Julian arranged everything." His gaze met mine, and this time he did not look away. Later, while Miles and Noah compared shipping records, Adrian stood beside me in the library. "I did not know you," he said. "No," I answered. "You knew what other people said about me." He reached toward a folded page tucked inside the final archive file, but stopped before touching it. "May I?" The question surprised me more than any command could have. I nodded. Adrian unfolded the letter and read the single sentence written in Ethan's careful hand. I do not need him to love me. I only need him to believe me once. Adrian read the sentence 3 times before setting the letter down. I should have believed him, he said. The distinction in his words made my chest tighten. He had said him, not you. For days, he had watched me speak about the original Ethan as though I were describing someone whose memories I had inherited rather than a life I had lived. I could continue pretending, but secrets were the reason we were sitting among stolen ledgers and unopened letters. The man who wrote that sentence is not exactly the man standing before you, I said. Adrian remained still. Explain. I looked at the fire instead of his face. When I woke on the morning you brought me the divorce papers, I remembered this life, but it felt like reading someone else's diary. I knew his fear, his loneliness, and the rooms where he had waited for you, yet I also remembered another life in another place. I had a small apartment, an accounting job, and no royal title. Then I opened my eyes in your palace. The confession sounded impossible. You believe you became someone else? Adrian asked. I believe Ethan reached the end of what he could endure, and somehow I arrived where he left off. He could have summoned physicians or accused me of deception. Instead, he studied me in uneasy silence. I do not understand how that could be possible, he said at last. But the man before me does not move, speak, or look at this palace the way Ethan once did. I will not call you a liar simply because the truth frightens me. He asked what I remembered, whether I had harmed the kingdom, and whether I intended to. Absolutely not, I said. I have only just repaired the pantry. A faint breath of laughter escaped him, the first I had heard. Then whatever happened that morning does not change what I owe either version of you. Adrian folded the letter carefully. The man who wrote this deserved to be heard. The man before me deserves to decide who he becomes. Warmth moved through my chest. I ignored it and returned to the ledgers. By noon, Miles had unpacked the official wax impressions he had taken before leaving the palace archive. We placed them beside the marks on the false transfer orders. At first they appeared identical, but the copied seal had a tiny flaw near the wolf's left ear. The same flaw appeared on every document authorizing missing supplies. A duplicate, Miles said. Made from a mold. Noah found the next clue while organizing shipping receipts. The 7 companies used different addresses, but every payment passed through the same private bank account controlled by Julian's secretary. When the snowfall eased on the 3rd morning, Adrian sent coded orders to investigators already working in the capital. Over the next 2 days, couriers returned along the cleared eastern road carrying coded reports that revealed the pattern. Julian had placed loyal clerks in the treasury, mailroom, and northern warehouses, isolating Adrian from inconvenient information and blaming the shortages on me. The stolen money was only part of his plan. He selected my replacement before the divorce petition was filed, I said, pointing to a letter recommending Lucas Voss as the next royal consort. Lucas was Julian's 24-year-old Omega nephew, known at court for his quiet manners and complete dependence on his uncle. Adrian's expression hardened. A consort controlled by Julian would give him access to every private council and household appointment. And eventually, every decision you make. Adrian looked across the table at the duplicate seal, the intercepted letters, and the carefully arranged future Julian had built around him. He did not merely steal from the crown, he said. He was constructing a throne behind mine. A knock sounded at the library door. One of the royal riders entered and handed Adrian a sealed message from the capital. Julian had learned that the letters were missing. He had called an emergency meeting of the Royal Council and publicly accused me of forging the evidence at Grey Haven. Adrian finished reading, then offered the message to me instead of deciding what I should know. He wants scandal to condemn you even if he cannot use iron chains, he said. I folded the paper and placed it beside the black notebook. Then we will return before he has time to choose the ending for us. If the council has already decided I am guilty, then I would rather hear the lie in person. 2 days later, royal engineers cleared the southern road. By sunrise, Adrian and I were riding toward the capital with Miles, Noah, and 4 sealed cases of evidence. Greyhaven disappeared behind us beneath a pale winter sky. I had wanted Noah to remain there, but he refused. They used my name in the warehouse records, he said. If I stay silent, Chancellor Voss will say I never existed. Adrian assigned 2 trusted guards to protect him and promised that Noah would speak only if he chose. Rumors met us before the palace. Julian claimed I had forged the notebook, manipulated northern families, and used Adrian's absence to invent a conspiracy. My sudden change, he said, proved I was unstable. That accusation was almost impressive. Apparently, cheerfully accepting a divorce was more suspicious than stealing thousands of crowns. When our carriage entered the palace courtyard, no servants came to greet me. Council officials watched from the steps. Beneath the marble archway, Julian looked less like a frightened criminal than a patient teacher waiting for a student to fail. Beside him stood Lucas Voss. He was slender, pale, and so tense that his hands trembled at his sides. "Your Majesty," Julian said, bowing to Adrian. "Thank goodness you returned safely. I feared Lord Hale had isolated you from sound judgment." Adrian's expression revealed nothing. "The council will hear every claim tomorrow." Julian looked at me and smiled. "Of course. Truth should never fear examination." That evening, Miles discovered that our archive access had been suspended, the Treasury had refused to release the original ledgers, and 2 warehouse witnesses had suddenly withdrawn their statements. Someone slipped a folded note beneath Noah's door warning him that his younger sister would lose her apprenticeship if he testified. Lucas received a different threat. Julian promised to expose his mother's debts and remove her from the family estate unless he accused me of pressuring him to replace me as royal consort. I found Lucas alone in the conservatory after midnight, staring at frost gathering along the glass. "I did not ask for your place," he whispered. "My uncle told me I could protect my mother if I obeyed." "Then tell the council that." He shook his head. "You do not understand what he controls." "I understand more than you think." I showed him a payment record connecting Julian's secretary to the false companies, but kept the copy in my hand. "You are not responsible for the cage someone built around you, but you must decide whether you will help him lock other people inside it." Before dawn, Adrian met us in a guarded records room. "If I challenge Julian too soon, his clerks will deny everything and disappear behind him," Adrian said. "So you intend to let him accuse me?" I asked. "Only until every official supporting him goes on record." I held his gaze. "The moment Noah is threatened, anyone tries to detain me, or you lose control of that room, the plan ends. Miles would remain at my side, and I would keep copies of every document." Adrian agreed without argument. By the time the bells rang, the Royal Council chamber was full. Julian presented forged transfer orders bearing my seal and called me a danger to the crown. He relied on an old prejudice: an abandoned Omega was emotional, unstable, and therefore easy to discredit. Noah sat behind me, pale but upright. Lucas stood beside his uncle, unable to meet my eyes. I waited for Adrian to challenge the documents. He did not. He sat on the raised platform beneath the royal crest, silent while council members repeated Julian's accusations. I knew why Adrian was waiting, but silence had been the weapon used against the original Ethan for years. Hearing it again felt too much like history choosing to repeat itself. When the council recessed, I found Adrian in the private corridor. "How long do you intend to let them bury me under lies?" I asked. "Until Julian believes he has revealed everyone loyal to him." "And what happens to me while you wait?" Adrian stepped closer. "I need you to trust me." I laughed once, without humor. That is a cruel request from the man who never trusted me. His face changed, but I continued before courage could leave me. "I will finish this because Greyhaven deserves justice. Noah deserves safety. The man who lived this life before me deserves his name returned to him. But when the hearing ends, whether we win or lose, I am leaving this palace for good." The council bell rang again. I turned away before Adrian could answer and walked back toward the chamber, where Julian Voss was already smiling as if he had written the final page. Before this council accepts another document bearing my seal, I ask one simple question. When was this violet black ink introduced to the royal offices? Julian's confident smile faltered. I stood in the center of the chamber with the forged transfer orders spread across the long oak table. Nobles leaned forward, eager to see whether I would collapse beneath their judgment. I pointed to the date written beside my signature. This order claims I approved the transfer 8 months ago. Yet the violet black ink used here was introduced to the royal offices only 4 months ago. Chancellor Voss approved that purchase himself. A murmur passed through the room. Julian recovered quickly. A minor clerical irregularity proves nothing. Then let us examine the seal. Miles stepped forward carrying 2 impressions beneath clear glass. One came from my official seal, which had remained locked in the royal archive. The other came from Julian's transfer orders. The copied mark contains a flaw beside the wolf's left ear, Miles explained. The same flaw appears on every false document. After investigators traced the lease to the Chancellor's private account, Adrian authorized a sealed search. They found wax, carving tools, and the duplicate mold inside. Julian turned toward Adrian. Your Majesty, this is manufactured evidence. Adrian remained silent, but this time I understood the difference. He was not abandoning me. He was giving Julian enough room to expose himself. I placed the black notebook on the table and opened it to the list of shipping companies. 7 companies received payment for supplies that never arrived. All 7 routed their funds through one private account controlled by Julian's secretary. Julian lost color. 3 treasury clerks along the wall lowered their eyes. Adrian finally spoke. Stand. The command was quiet. One by one, the clerks rose. Adrian named the accounts they had opened, the documents they had altered, and the payments they had accepted. Investigators had spent 3 days tracing the money. Their final confirmations arrived during the hearing. Julian had expected the council to become his shield. Instead, he had gathered every accomplice in one room. Noah Bennett, Adrian said, his voice gentler. You may speak if you choose. Noah walked forward with trembling hands and presented the note threatening his sister's apprenticeship. He explained how relief wagons had passed Greyhaven empty while official records claimed full delivery. Julian called him an ungrateful servant. That was when Lucas stepped away from his uncle. No, he said, his voice unsteady but clear. He is telling the truth. Julian stared at him. Lucas placed his own written statement beside Noah's. He described the threats against his mother, the plan to install him as royal consort, and Julian's promise that Adrian would soon rule only in name. Shocked whispers filled the chamber. Adrian rose from the throne. Julian Voss, you are removed from office. Your accounts and estates will be frozen pending public trial. You and every official who assisted you will face prosecution under the law. Julian protested, but no one answered. His borrowed authority vanished with the truth. Adrian then descended from the platform and stood beside me before the entire council. Ethan Hale was falsely accused, he announced. His warnings were intercepted, his name was used without permission, and his reputation was damaged by this court's failure to investigate. The fault belongs not only to Julian Voss. It belongs to me. He removed his crown and placed it on the table. Then the Alpha King lowered himself to one knee. Every voice in the chamber disappeared. I cannot undo the years when I refused to see you, he said. I cannot ask the man who came before you to forgive what he endured, and I will not demand forgiveness from the man standing here now. I can only tell the truth publicly, as I should have done from the beginning. You were innocent. You were brave. And I failed you. I looked at the crown beside the forged papers and understood what the gesture cost him. Adrian was not asking me to return. He was giving back the name his silence had helped take away. I turned toward Noah, Lucas, Miles, and the council members who could no longer avoid my eyes. Then let the record show, I said, that Greyhaven was never a nest of thieves. It was a home built by people the kingdom forgot. Adrian rose slowly. And it will never be forgotten again. The divorce became final 3 days after the council hearing. Adrian signed first and placed the document before me without argument, condition, or request. Your freedom should never depend on whether I deserve another chance, he said. I signed beneath his name, and for the first time, the end of our marriage did not feel like rejection. It felt like a door I had chosen to walk through. The investigation lasted for months. Julian Voss was convicted of fraud, abuse of office, witness intimidation, and conspiracy against the Crown. His properties were sold, and every recovered crown was placed into the Northern Relief Fund. The clerks who helped him lost their positions, repaid what they had taken, and were barred from public office. Cooperation only reduced their sentences. Lucas testified openly, then moved with his mother to a modest home near the coast, where he began training as a teacher. Noah's sister kept her apprenticeship, and Noah earned a scholarship to the Royal Academy. He chose accounting, declaring that numbers were easier to trust when good people guarded them. Greyhaven was granted permanent legal protection and became the center of a new relief foundation. My name was cleared, but Adrian went further, telling the full court that Ethan Hale had discovered the theft months earlier and been ignored because powerful men found silence convenient. The original Ethan finally received the recognition he had deserved. I returned to Greyhaven without a royal title and discovered that freedom came with leaking roofs, endless supply lists, and children who believed my office belonged to them after breakfast. It was the happiest work I had ever done. Adrian did not ask me to return to the palace. Instead, twice a month, he left the capital on Friday afternoon and stayed at Greyhaven until Sunday morning, arriving without a royal procession. At first, he brought expensive gifts. I sent them back. On his next visit, he brought lumber and spent 6 hours repairing the garden fence with Noah. His measurements were terrible, but his effort was sincere. Over the following year, he learned I took tea without sugar, hated formal dinners, and needed quiet before difficult decisions. More importantly, he asked before entering my room, changing my plans, or offering help. I learned that Adrian loved old mystery novels, could not bake bread, and laughed most easily when no one treated him like a king. Trust returned slowly, not as a command or a bond, but as hundreds of ordinary choices. On the first warm evening of spring, Adrian met me in Greyhaven's garden beneath the pear tree Clara had planted. He held a simple wooden ring he had carved himself. It was slightly uneven. "I am not asking you to become royal consort again," he said. "I am asking whether I may become your partner, wherever you choose to live." I looked toward the house, where Noah was reading to the younger children beside an open window. Smoke curled from the repaired chimneys, flowers bordered the path, and every room glowed with safety. "Yes," I said. "But we are keeping separate offices." Adrian smiled. "That is reasonable." We married again in the garden with Miles, Lucas, Noah, and the Greyhaven families as witnesses. There were no political contracts and no jeweled crown, only promises we had written together. Years later, the old divorce papers rested behind a family photograph in a wooden frame. In the picture, Adrian and I stood on Greyhaven's porch surrounded by the people who had turned a ruined estate into a home. One peaceful morning, I found him in the sunlit kitchen making coffee while children laughed outside among the pear blossoms. My 3 old suitcases rested in the attic, empty and covered with dust. I no longer kept them ready beside the door, because I was no longer waiting to escape fear, loneliness, or injustice. I had been given another life, and at last, I had chosen exactly where it would belong.